the other thing is for a patient, about 80% of these patients are going to get a rule out result. And that means either they're the worried well or they have something else going on that then that primary care can focus on, okay, it's very, very unlikely it's Alzheimer's and related dementias. Let's figure out those other things, but that can stay at the primary care level. And only those people that look like, I don't know about this. This needs further evaluation. They're going up. So we've had very positive reception from both payers and primary care docs because
Danguole, Sid, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
Logan, great to be here.
So you've built this company, CX Precision Medicine, and we're going to get all into the challenges you're addressing and actually what you've built. But let's just start by letting our audience know a little bit more about you. And I want to know, how did the two of you meet? Danguole, let's hear it from you first, and then Sid.
Sure. So CX Precision Medicine was really founded to commercialize the work coming out of Sid's lab. And so we met about 4 or 5 years ago, and really as a startup, and have been working together since then. But I'm going to turn to Sid to talk really about where the whole inspiration for this came from and where the need was, because that very much came from him.
Okay, Sid.
So I'm a clinician by training. I'm a neuropsychologist, and so I've worked in multiple memory clinics. And over the course of my training, I would see all of these patients getting to dementia care clinics, and so many of them, they were years into this process of what's going on. And I always felt that we can do better. We can figure out a way to get something out there. And for me, it just made sense to build something for primary care doctors, something that would help at the primary care level of you need to get an exam or you don't. And so, my grandmother is kind of what pushed me down this road. I was in grad school studying neuropsychology whenever indication that she started having issues. And so from 1,500 miles away, I'm working with my own family of how do we get a diagnosis in Louisiana. And, knowing people from being there and going to my undergrad there, I was able to expedite the process, but it still took about 18 months. And it was several $1,000s that my family couldn't afford. So that was the mission as I reshifted where I was headed with my whole career, and try to figure out how do we get something for doctors at the frontline screening levels to know who to get to those specialty clinics and who doesn't. And so that's the very foundation of what later became CX Precision Medicine.
Very nice.
And I can add on what really attracted me about CX Precision Medicine and the mission and all of the work that Sid had done. Besides just a lot of respect for all of the work and the deep science that had gone into it, my career had really focused on both the healthcare system overall. And I could really understand because I used to run clinics back in the day. I came out of McKinsey. I first worked for Kelsey-Seybold Clinic, so a very large multi-specialty clinic in Houston, and then went on a path working with payers and providers. And so I could really understand the challenges and the need to be able to treat as many patients as possible at the primary care level, but have the right people be moved up the system and into specialty care. And I could understand from a payer perspective, whether that's the government or private pay, why having a more streamlined way for evaluating patients is both better for the patients and better for the system overall.
Okay, let's get a little more granular on the current state of affairs when it comes to diagnosing mild cognitive impairment. You talked about giving tools to primary care physicians to help them really at that first level of triage. Walk me through, maybe Sid, you can start. Walk me through, what's the current standard of care and where you see the biggest gaps and problems.
Well, and for me, that biggest gap is at primary care. So what the standard of care today would be is someone has a complaint, whether it's the patient, their loved one, or even the doc themselves. And so that, okay, so something's going on. We think something's going on with memory. If the doc feels that, all right, yes, this is valid, then what next? And so some primary care docs would do a bedside exam, just a brief something. Unfortunately, those bedside exams are not accurate at detecting, especially early phase Alzheimer's, much less mild cognitive impairment. Also, most docs who work with patients 65 and above, the average clinic time is 14 minutes. And so they're worried about other things. That referral to the specialty, it requires that referral to that specialty clinic, to that psychiatrist, neurologist, or whomever. And so a lot of patients simply don't get referred because they're not sure what's going on. They want to see something a little more advanced. And then the problem would be many of these dementia clinics. So that's the referral would then go for comprehensive cognitive assessment, normally at least an MRI and a blood workup. And a lot of that is to rule out things. So you want to rule out a head injury, you want to rule out normal pressure hydrocephalus, you want to rule out some blood level, so diabetes that's completely out of control, etc. And so with that full package, that's then the diagnosis. If someone has the money, they can get an amyloid scan or they can get a lumbar puncture scan for confirmatory diagnostics. And so the current state is very laborious, time consuming. And it's the gap is who needs to be referred. Having run dementia clinics, a large number of patients that we did get didn't need to be there. They were worried well. And what they were happy to get that assessment. And then the referring doc could look for other reasons like things that I just said. So that's kind of the state of where things are today.
Danguole, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about how this fits in, this idea of this test that you're developing fits into a couple of macro trends. One of them is the development of other therapeutics for Alzheimer's, how that feeds in, and then also just our aging population, just how this market is shifting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been really fantastic advances in finally the approval over the last, 2 years, 18 months, last summer, of some disease-modifying therapies that are really targeting amyloid pathology. And so on one hand, that's really terrific for the field that now it offers hope to people, but those therapies work better if you catch Alzheimer's at an early stage. And so that's also fueling a lot of people going to their primary care physicians where before they thought, well, there's no hope. Now it's sort of, well, I've read about something in the newspaper, maybe there's something going on. The issue is that there's a lot of other pathologies besides the amyloid pathologies that are existing in the field. And so there are a bunch of companies out there that are maybe targeting neuroinflammation, or there's a lot of work on even the GLP-1 drugs being effective. And so if you end up having a screening test at the primary care level that is only looking at amyloid pathology, you're going to have problems with that because one is that about 25% of patients don't have amyloid pathology, and that's especially true in diverse populations. And Sid's published extensively on this, with more to come. So you're going to miss those patients, and maybe they'd be a great candidate for a different drug that's targeting a different pathology. The other issue is that about 30% of patients that are 70 and up are cognitively normal, have amyloid pathology, and may never end up having Alzheimer's, which is what you hope. So you hope they never end up having cognitive impairment. And so if you have a screening test that's just on amyloid and tau at that primary care level, you've now gotten a bunch of people worried that probably don't have a good reason to worry, and you're referring them up the line for specialty care. I'm not saying those tests aren't great. I think they can be terrific and they're necessary to say, should this patient be on some of these new therapies? I just don't believe it should be that first evaluation. The first evaluation should be, which way, because the drugs are not effective on patients with no cognitive impairment. So it's a requirement to have both that cognition and pathology. So,
So we've talked kind of around what you are actually building from different angles, but I want to make sure that our listeners and our viewers know exactly what CX precision medicine is.
yep.
We've talked about a panel for primary care for not just ruling out or diagnosing one type of amyloid pathology, but it's a range of things. So Sid, walk us through in so the most concise way possible, exactly what is the panel? What are you building?
So what we've built is a blood test that is used specifically to rule out whether or not someone has memory issues. Do they have cognitive dysfunction? It was built on that. It was built on a clinical diagnosis. It wasn't built on whether or not someone has brain amyloid or tau or whatever in their brain. It was built on clinical symptoms. And as Danguole pointed out, that's actually the first step. We need to know whether or not they have something going on clinically, because that's the indication of the drugs. The drugs aren't available for preventative purposes. So it's also, as the field is now realizing, that even Alzheimer's is more complicated than just amyloid. So we look actually at a broad panel of markers that cover things like inflammation and vascular dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction. And so it's a panel of markers that predict used as, all right, you do not need to follow up on anything because your profile does not look like someone with cognitive impairment. That would be dementia, maybe Alzheimer's or something else. And so it's just a blood test that covers a broader pathology that says you look cognitively okay, so or not. And if you do, that allows your providing doctor to say, you're fine. Let's pause. Let's reduce some of that stress. Let's not increase additional financial and medical burden. And if you still feel this way, we'll test it later. But at the same time, it allows that doc to look in things like depression, diabetes, other possible causes of the complaint. So that would be my summary of it.
Yeah, that's helpful. I'm
Yeah.
just curious, Dingwall, I'm just curious how you how you phrase it, how you think about it. Obviously,
Yeah.
Sid's on like he's deep in the lab, and when you translate it to other folks, maybe even on the payer side, like how do you talk about it?
Well, primary care physicians, about 50% of primary care physicians don't do any cognitive testing at all. So as much as, Sid calls it a bedside visit, or you can call it any other type of, whether it's digital, whether it's a traditional, they don't do any of it. So those patients either get a referral, which then clogs up the pipeline, or they get a wait and see, which means if they actually have Alzheimer's and dementia, then they end up waiting. So this certainly gives a tool for the ones who are just not doing any kind of cognitive assessment. And I think for even the ones that do a digital cognitive assessment or a traditional cognitive assessment, it's an initial triage that doesn't take any resource from that doctor. So from a physician standpoint, it's kind of an easy first test to do and figure out where someone goes. And then you start a variety of other tests afterwards. From a payer standpoint, that can really save the costs that all come in on that further up the way. The other thing is for a patient, about 80% of these patients are going to get a rule out result. And that means either they're the worried well or they have something else going on that then that primary care can focus on, okay, it's very, very unlikely it's Alzheimer's and related dementias. Let's figure out those other things, but that can stay at the primary care level. And only those people that look like, I don't know about this. This needs further evaluation. They're going up. So we've had very positive reception from both payers and primary care docs because the primary care docs have, I've actually had one say, finally, a useful tool, something I can really implement and use. And we've had payers say, oh, okay, well, those costs are really high.
Mm.
And we are afraid of the risk that people put people on these new drugs that really should not be on those drugs. And those are really expensive costs and side effects. So we've had very good reception from both of those audiences.
Let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the startup itself and just what it's going to take to go
Yep.
from amazing idea to scale
Yep.
and to like me being able to recommend that my parents and
Yep.
somebody's grandparents actually go and get this test. Uh, Danguale, starting with you, what are the biggest challenges and hurdles? Obviously, you just told us what some of the positive reception is. Is it more the science? Is it more working with, changing primary care physician behavior?
Mhm.
Or is it something else? What's the biggest?
Well, it's really initially it's the validation and the regulatory. So we are in the midst of and close to completing validation as a lab developed test. And what that means is that we would be allowed to offer this test to physicians. They would be able to order it from us. We'd have to work out a number of the logistics of how that happens, selecting the blood and having it sent and everything. But that is, you know, it very to be done in the first half of this year. So it's that is very much underway. And at that point, we are technically commercializing. Um, After that, it's working with the payers, with getting a reimbursement code, of being able to have people that you can do that with. So our goal this year is actually to pilot with a small number of doctor groups and really make sure that operationally it works. So Logan, you wouldn't be able to tell your mom, I think, this year, unless, she lives in Texas and we work something out, go and take this test. But we're hoping it's not very far away, actually, compared to a lot of the other, a lot of the work that's very early and is kind of many years to come. It's getting pretty close.
Sid, over to you. What are you most excited about for the next, let's say, 12 months in terms of validating the science, bringing it to market? What's next for you?
For me, the most exciting component is, seeing it help patients, seeing the docs get something that they can use because you have such a large portion of individuals who have memory complaints and concerns. And most of those people do not have dementia. They are sometimes it's depression or anxiety or it's diabetes or some other thing. So for me, it's just I want to see it get out there and help patients. We can do better as a clinician. I feel like we haven't done what we should do. My grandmother deserved more. And so that's for me, it's just, I think, getting it out there and getting the patients is a personal thing for me. And I know she'd be pretty proud of that. From there, to me, I look at it as, okay, we've got it there. Now let's scale it. Let's get it out there to more people. And then let's get the other tests out there. We've got a lot more we can do to help patients. And so, I'm super excited about this. Everything I do and I have done from a research standpoint has all been about helping patients. That's why I'm here. So, the logistics and the science is fun, and I'm a nerd, and I enjoy that. But it's still about helping patients. So I'm thrilled to see it almost there.
Sid, do you feel like we're in an inflection point in Alzheimer's in terms of our understanding of these biomarkers and what to do with them?
Absolutely, unequivocally, that has become very clear in the last, say, 12, 24 months because, the field came out with, really amazing findings now that we can look at amyloid and tau among living people with these PET scans. And because most people just don't want to do lumbar punctures. And what now all of a sudden we have an amyloid therapeutic on market out there helping patients. At the same time, though, what we've seen from our study and others is that we need a broader representation in our research. We can't look at one group of individuals and say, this is Alzheimer's. Our data is clearly saying, absolutely, that's Alzheimer's in that group. When you want to broaden your perspective and look at Alzheimer's across our community, Alzheimer's is more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And I think the field has finally taken notice and went, oh, wait. Yes, that's true. And the whole field is saying, okay, we really need to understand these things. And I find that extremely exciting because that's the road to precision health. That's the road to what drug for what person when. And so we're definitely at a huge, huge inflection point, and the field is evolving rapidly.
Danguole, I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of what makes this a unique moment in time for this kind of innovation.
No, I think on top of what Sid said, there's really an interest. I think the thing that having these new drugs has done is it's really focused people on there can be solutions, and those solutions include drugs. They don't have to be only drugs because there's also a lot of innovations that have happened on lifestyle, on risk modifying, on diet, and everything else that all together give a lot of hope in a field that even when I started working on this, not like Sid many, many decades ago, but even 5 years ago, there was a feeling of there isn't much that we can do. So I'm very passionate about this. I've been fortunate I've not had Alzheimer's directly in my family, but I think that we can do better. And I do think that we can make it easier to find the people that should be on those drugs and hopefully future drugs. Find the people that say, wait a minute, maybe I need to change my lifestyle, my diet, my stress level, how I sleep. Maybe I need to get that hearing aid and it would really help me. So there's a lot of things that are not pharmaceuticals that can help. And I think that can move the needle for all of us. So I think it's really important. You had asked about the increase in the number of
That's right.
people. Certainly, if you look at the number of the population trends in general, the number of people that are aging, and I think also as people become aware that maybe this isn't just normal aging, there are people that start saying, well, maybe I can do something so that we can have a lot more healthy older people that are enjoying their lives and with their families.
Well, that's a great note to end on. And I just love the work that you're doing, Danguole. Sid, I appreciate you're giving practical tools to these primary care physicians who are trying so hard to help their patients. They want to do more. They don't have the time, the tools to do it, and they need things like this. And so it's going to be an exciting year to see as you validate this and as it comes to market. It can't come soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. So I wish you the best in that process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Logan.
All right, take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Be well.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.